Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, you're checking out an updated solo Magicka Nightblade build for the Elder Scrolls Online. We're going to start off with the solo 1-bar setup. This is great for soloing dungeons, grinding XP, grinding gold, even tackling world bosses. Of course, I will talk about a 2-bar setup in greater detail if you want to do even more damage and extend the build as far as possible. So we'll cover everything from the stats to gear, skill options, champion points. I'll talk about the outfit style at the end, and I'll have some gameplay as well. So here we go. All right, everybody, here we are back on the Magicka Nightblade for a solo PVE build and solo 1-bar build. I'll be showing you the 2-bar setup as well. But just keep in mind, this is for soloing in the Elder Scrolls Online. This is not a pure DPS build. So we'll talk about, survivability, healing, damage shields, everything you need to solo on the Magicka Nightblade in ESO. So checking out the stats on the build, of course, first, we do have a spell power potion, which you need if you're doing the 1-bar setup. And that's going to give you about 41k max magicka, 20k max health, about 12k max stamina, over 1000 magicka recovery, 650 stamina recovery, 2200 spell damage. Now that will go up if you're using the 2-bar version with a backbar weapon enchant. About 65% spell critical is looking good. And then our resistances do go up with our defensive passives there from the shadow skill line. So about 19k spell resistance and 15k physical resistance. Of course, we are relying heavily on damage shields for soloing on this build, so that's going to help out quite a bit with survivability as well. Now, this is a Magicka Nightblade build, so of course we have 64 points into max magicka here for the attributes. Lover Mundus is probably going to be your best bet in terms of soloing. That's going to make your penetration on the setup as high as possible. As far as the food, you can use blue food, so the max health and max magicka. I also recommend tri-stat food if you're doing more difficult content, such as veteran dungeons or anything that requires a lot of blocking and roll dodging. You'll want the extra stamina in that case. Potions, like we said, spell power potions, that's giving us 20% spell damage, 10% spell critical. That's going to be very good on the 1-bar setup. On the 2-bar setup, you may be able to run tri-stat potions or even just trash magicka potions. Probably will be fine. In terms of the races here, you do have a lot of good options, I think, on the Magicka Nightblade. I went with Breton for this one. Breton's probably going to be my top pick in this spot because of the extra sustain. The Magicka Mastery passive gives you 7% reduced cost of all your Magicka abilities. So almost everything that we're doing on this setup is reduced by 7%. That's going to be really, really strong. Of course, High Elf is good too. But, Breton just has extra spell resistance, which is nice. It has extra magicka recovery. Of course, you do get the 2000 max magicka, so you can't go wrong with this. High Elf will be fine. You'll get more damage on the High Elf, as well as Dark Elf. You'll have good damage and max stats. If you're a Dark Elf, even Khajiit will be pretty strong because we have high critical chance already. I think that covered the basics. Let's jump into the gear sets next. So you saw that high spell critical. That's because I am using Mother Sorrow on the Mag Nightblade. This gives us max stamina and a lot of spell critical on this build. I think this plays really well on the Magicka Nightblade. We already have passives, which we'll talk about in a minute, which increase our critical chance and make our crits hit harder. So kind of investing into your crit chance on the Magicka Nightblade is pretty smart. It's a good thing to do on this setup. I also like that this gear set is really, really easy to get. The lightning staff you can get from a quest in the zone of Deshan, and then the jewelry, you can just farm dolmens for that. So it's pretty easy to get this overall. You can even buy it on Guild Traders if you want. So I'm using the lightning staff with an infused trait, and that's just because we are using the damage shield enchant on the front bar. That's giving us over 5k damage shield every 5 seconds. That's going to do a lot for the survivability on the solo build. And then, like I mentioned, using 3 pieces of jewelry here to complete the 5-piece set. Remember, staff counts for 2, and then your jewelry is going to be 3, 4, and 5. So we've got necklace and 2 rings, all spell damage enchants. That's what I would recommend. because we are doing a fair bit of heavy attacking, so you get good sustain on this build. And then just to make it simple, I kept the arcane trait, so max magicka on everything here. So that's going to cover a very strong damage set. For our next 5-piece set, you have some options here, but I'll tell you what I like. I'm using the Bahara's Curse set. Now, this is from the Thieves Guild DLC, so it's a pretty old set, but I like what it does in terms of the stats and the proc effect here. So you get all 3 max stats. You get 1200 max health, about 1100 max magicka, and max stamina. You even have an extra 4-piece here, reducing your trap damage. I'm not sure if that even works, but check out the 5-piece. This is what I really like on the Magicka Nightblade. When you deal damage, you have a 25% chance to create desecrated ground for 5 seconds. It snares enemies by 70%, damages them for about 1200 magic damage, and heals you for 100% of the damage done. So I'll show you what the effect looks like in a little bit. It's really cool. But just think about this, 1200 magic damage every 1 second, and this is an AoE effect. So if you're grinding CP, if you're grinding gold, this is going to affect every target that you have on that desecrated ground. It's like a rune that shows up on the ground, and you heal for every target. So it's not just 1200 health every second, that's 1200 times however many enemies that you're hitting. So if you're pulling massive pulls, the healing back on this set is going to be amazing. Plus, it does really nice damage over time, and it's just a fun kind of Nightblade-ish set. I do like it. Now, this does come in light armor. I believe you can get it in heavy armor as well. I'm not totally sure if they still have that in the game or not, but you might find some pieces like on Guild Traders. But the light armor is totally fine. We are doing 5 light on this build, so light shoes, legs, hands, waist, and chest. You can get the divine trait there. That's going to be your best in slot. Max magicka on all your pieces there. Now, what can you use if you don't have access to this set or you weren't able to farm or buy it yet? Well, just any basic damage set is going to be very strong. Think about something like Spinners. That's another tradable set that you can get in Minotaur. That's a very good set. You can even put on a crafted set. Something like New Moon Acolyte will be very strong as well. So you have some options here. I found that Bahara's Curse did almost as good damage as those more damage-oriented sets, but I get the extra health every 1 second. So that's really cool. That's why I'm using it as kind of a hybrid offensive and healing or defensive set on the build. Last but not least, let's talk about the monster set. I went with Iceheart again on the Magicka Nightblade. That's for a couple reasons. Number one, we get more spell critical. So I'm trying to get as much spell critical on the build as possible. You do get that on the 1-piece. For the 2-piece, we're getting about 6100 damage shield for 6 seconds. This does proc based on your crit chance. So combining this with Mother Sorrow means you're going to have a very strong uptime on that damage shield. It also does a little bit of AoE frost damage, but really not much. Mainly we're using it for the damage shield. So even though I do have a damage shield glyph here on my main hand, that's only 5k. So when you combine that with the Iceheart damage shield, we're basically over 11, almost 12k damage shield total on the build. Plus, we'll talk about on the 2-bar setup, you can get even more shields basically for free. So in terms of survivability, this is still your best in-slot option. So I definitely recommend that if you have access to it. Now, in terms of the weights here on the monster set, heavy head and medium shoulders will be your best weights. That's because we can make use of the 511 Undaunted passive. It's going to give us 6% max stats overall on this build. So that would be the best. And then, of course, Divines as the trait if you can get that. So that's the 1-bar setup. Again, I'm using Bahara's Curse. I'm using Mother Sorrow and then Iceheart. That's the setup. Now let's talk about the 1-bar skills. So we're going to start off with Lotus Fan. This is from the Nightblade Assassination skill line. This is the second regular skill that you get. Lotus Fan is the Magicka morph. So this is interesting because it does a lot for us. It does do upfront damage. It is a teleport, meaning it is a gap closer. So this is very nice for moving around dungeons quickly, going from one group to the next. But not only that, it is a dot. It does have a damage over time effect. And it gives us a very strong debuff called Minor Vulnerability that increases the damage that an enemy takes by 8%. Now, this also does an AoE effect. So basically, every enemy in the area is going to be affected by that Minor Vulnerability debuff, making all of your attacks then hit for more damage. So this is a really cool skill. On these 1-bar setups especially, I look for skills that do multiple things, and this does a lot for just having one skill slotted on your bar. So very cool. I do recommend this. Next up, we're using Unstable Wall of Storms. That is from the Destruction Staff skill line. Second skill you get. Typically, I'm using the Blockade morph, which lasts longer, but Unstable Wall lasts for 10 seconds, and it gives you over 6k magic damage at the end of that 10 seconds. Now, why did I use this morph? Well, I just felt like it lined up really well with the first ability, Lotus Fan, because this gives us minor vulnerability for 10 seconds as well. So it's really easy to manage the rotation on this build because both of our main dots last for 10 seconds. You can use the other morph of Wall if you prefer, but you will do a lot more damage with the unstable Wall morph, and like I said, it just lines up the rotation a lot easier. Next up, Dark Shade. This comes from the Shadow skill line. Extremely important skill line. You get a lot of passives from this, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Dark Shade is the last ability here. Now, Dark Shade is the morph that you want because it does a lot as well. This does AoE damage as well as AoE minor maim, which is an extremely important debuff when you're soloing. What that does, it reduces the enemy's damage that they do to you by 15%. That's a 4-second duration, but it'll basically refresh itself every 3 to 4 seconds. So you don't have to worry about keeping that up. And on a boss fight, this makes such a huge difference because that boss is going to hit you for 15% less damage. It's also AoE, so if you're pulling big groups of mobs, you're going to debuff all of them at once. So you just get so much from this ability, not to mention the passives, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, next we have our main damaging skill. And actually, I have two different options here in terms of what you're doing at the time. So let me start with the single target option in this case. So I'm using Swallow Soul in this position. That's from the Siphoning class line. It's the first ability that you get. The other more funnel health does basically 2 heals, so it's more of like a group or a healer skill. Swallow Soul is definitely the morph that you want if you're soloing on the Nightblade class. So this does pretty decent magic damage. And again, it is giving you a very strong heal every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. Now, if this crits, it can hit for, 15, 16k fully buffed. A third of that, you're basically getting between 5 and 6k, depending on your champion points, 5 to 6k health back every 2 seconds. So that's a massive heal over time. Very, very strong, and it's really helpful, especially in single target boss fights where you get that constant health rolling in. I definitely would recommend that. Now, if you're doing more like XP grinding or you're clearing through AoE packs, clearing through dungeons, this is single target, so it's really not going to help you very much. In that case, what I recommend is another siphoning ability called Sap Essence. That's what we're going to put there instead. So Sap Essence is going to be the last ability that you get in siphoning, and Sap Essence, that is the Magicka morph. So this does almost as much damage, but you can see it's to all nearby enemies. So it is AoE, and it heals us for every enemy hit, plus 20% more for each enemy hit. So this can heal for quite a lot, especially if you have a lot of enemies. Now, this also gives you major sorcery. So I mentioned in the intro, you can run trash potions on this build if you're running this skill, because this gives you your 20% spell damage buff for free. So that's a really cool option as well. But again, I would only use this for AoE situations. For single target, I'm going to go back to Swallow Soul there. Last normal ability here is going to be Merciless Resolve. That comes from the Assassination skill line. Last ability that you get, Merciless Resolve, is the Magicka morph, so I do recommend that. It's a 40-second buff, and it's pretty interesting here. It basically stacks up with each light or heavy attack. A light attack gives you 1 stack. Heavy attack gives you 2 stacks with a maximum of 5 stacks on this build. Now, every stack that you have increases your damage reduction by 2%. So basically, you take 2% less damage for each stack that you have. If you have the 5 full stacks, then you're getting 10% permanent damage reduction on your character, which is really nice for soloing. By the way, that doesn't even disappear after 40 seconds. The 40 seconds is more for the damaging aspect of this, which you can read about below. Once you get the full 5 stacks, you can activate the Assassin's Will bow proc. That's going to do about 17k magic damage. It's also going to give you a pretty juicy burst heal. So yes, you can use it either way. You can decide to hold on to the stacks. Again, 5 stacks is giving you 10% damage reduction, or you can fire off the bow at 5 stacks, giving you massive burst damage. It's really up to you. For me, it just depends on how difficult the boss is. If I'm fighting like a DLC boss or a veteran dungeon, I'm going to probably hold on to my bow stacks to get that extra 10% reduced damage. If not, if I'm not taking that much damage, then I'm definitely going to use the bow proc instead for the extra burst. Now again, this is a single target ability, so what I recommend if you are doing AoE is just put a passive here. You can slot Inner Light from the Mage's Guild. This is really good because it gives you more max Magicka and the spell critical buff called Major Prophecy that gives you that extra 10% spell critical that we want all the time on the build. So with these two abilities, Sap Essence and Inner Light, you can definitely run those just basic Magicka potions for AoE. That's going to be really strong. But then again, for single target, especially boss fights, check out Merciless Resolve. It will be very, very strong for you, both offensively and defensively. Finally, the ultimate for the 1-bar setup is going to be Soul Harvest for single target. This just does very strong upfront damage and also increases our damage on the target by 20% for 6 seconds. So keep that in mind. That's a really strong buff. As soon as you drop that, you want to make sure that you do a bunch of damage after that because everything you do is going to be buffed by 20%. The Major Defile here, really not a big deal. But you do get 10 ultimate back per kill when you have this slotted on your front bar, which is pretty nice. So single target fights, I would recommend that. For AoE, I would go with something more AoE focused like Soul Tether. This does strong AoE magic damage. It does have a stun as well as a heal over time. So very, very nice for any situation where you have ads coming into the fight or even if you're grinding XP or something like that. So Soul Harvest, that is from the Assassination skill line. And then Soul Tether, that is from the Siphoning skill line. So let's go over just a basic rotation. Let's start with AoE mode first. So if I'm just clearing my way through a dungeon, I'm going to make sure that I have Sap Essence for AoE. I've got Inner Light for a little extra bonus damage. And then Soul Tether is my ultimate on the 1-bar setup. To start, I'm just going to send in my Shade. Then I'm going to Gap Close in. Put down my lightning wall, and then you can just Sap Essence until they're dead, basically. So let's check it out. You can see I'm doing tons of AoE damage here. Now, remember, you also have your ultimate, so when that's up, go ahead and pop that for some extra burst damage, the stun, and the healing back. It's really, really strong. So that's the basic AoE setup, and then if we want to just check out single target mode here really quickly, remember we're going to switch to Swallow Soul for the extra healing, extra damage, Merciless if you need a damage reduction, and then Soul Harvest is going to be our ultimate. So very similar, except obviously we have Swallow Soul instead of Sap Essence. But you're going to send in your Shade, then Lotus Fan, get your wall, and then if you have your ultimate, go ahead and pop that, because that's now going to buff all my damage. I can hit him with like 3 or 4 Swallow Souls just back to back. And then that's going to be doing just tons and tons of single target damage. So there you go. That's how that looks. Now, how would you adjust this if you wanted to do a 2-bar setup on the Magblade? Very, very simple. All you would need is a back bar lightning staff. Remember, we do have the infused lightning staff front bar. I would just get another one for the back bar. If you have access to it, of course, you can run a VMA staff in this slot. That's going to be very powerful as well. What I recommend for that, either way, doesn't matter what staff you have, get an infused trait with the damage enchant. That's 452 spell damage. That'll be over 600 spell damage when you're fully buffed. So you get lots and lots of spell damage for that. Everything else is going to stay the same on the 2-bar setup. In terms of the skills, you now have access to your back bar. So some of these dots like Wall of Elements, that can be dropped to the back. So in terms of that back bar, I'm going to move Wall of Elements there. I'm going to combine that with another AoE damage over time called Twisting Path. Again, this is for our back bar. That comes from the Shadow skill line. That's the third ability that you get. Twisting Path is the damage morph. There is a healing morph that you can choose as well, but the damage here is really strong. Over 2k magic damage every 1 second. Also gives you major expedition, increases your speed while you're in that path. Keep unstable wall there. I would move my Dark Shade to the back as well. And then since you have some extra bar slots, I would just recommend another buff here called Siphoning Attacks. This is from the Siphoning skill line. It's the second to last ability that you get. Choose Siphoning Attacks for the Magicka morph. This gives you both health and Magicka. Basically every light or heavy attack. So not only do you get the extra sustain, you get the extra healing, which is going to be really, really nice. So I definitely recommend that. Put Merciless on your back bar just for that buff, and then Soul Tether on the back bar. In terms of the front bar, I would use Soul Harvest here still. Remember, that does give you extra ultimate generation, so that's going to be really, really strong. Remember, we moved Unstable Wall to the back bar, so that gives us a free slot for a buff on the front bar. Now, what I would choose in this case is the Sigil Order skill line called Channeled Acceleration. Now, you do need the Somerset chapter for this, and you need to complete the guild quest to get access to this buff, but it's a really strong buff. Gives you Major Expedition, which is great for speeding your way through a dungeon. It gives you a Minor Force buff as well. So that's 36 seconds of 10% increased critical damage. Nightblades already get increased critical damage, so this is just going to stack on top of that, making your crits hit much, much harder. Not only that, you do get from your passives a free damage shield if you have this slotted on the front bar, so I definitely recommend checking that out. If you don't have access to that, another really nice option is from the Mages Guild. You can run the Entropy Morph that gives you the Spell Power buff. That's another way to save some money on potions if you want. Now, we did move Darkshade to the back bar, so you could run either Sap Essence again here, or you could run an extra heal if you want. A pretty cool heal that Nightblades have access to is Dark Cloak. This gives you about 1200 health every 1 second, as well as minor protection. So that's a pretty nice option if you want just a quick heal. That also makes the enemies hit you for a little bit less damage. That's another nice option there. Keep Swallow Soul there, and then like we had for the AoE version, just drop Inner Light back here on your front bar. Last but not least, you can also choose to run an Execute on the front bar. You don't always need an Execute, but it can be nice, especially on longer boss battles. In that case, the Magicka Nightblade does have a very strong Execute ability called Impale. That is from Assassination. That's the first ability that you get, actually. Impale is the Magicka Morph. And you do 300% bonus damage to enemies below 25% health. So check that out. Now, in terms of the passives here, most of these are very strong. Executioner, this gives you bonus resources. When you kill off your enemy, pressure points. This does give you extra weapon and spell critical based on how many assassination abilities you have slotted. So that's strong as well. And then we talked about the extra critical damage that Nightblades get. 10% increased critical damage from the Hemorrhage passive. Make sure you pick that up. The Minor Savagery really doesn't matter because you don't really care about weapon critical, but make sure you get this for the crit damage. Now, Shadow, these are very important to understand. These are quite different from other classes. Crushing Shadow is one of the best passives in the game. Increases your health, stamina, and magic recovery by 15%. Really, really nice. Shadow Barrier, this gives you Major Resolve for 6 seconds. So that's that 50 to 80 physical and spell resistance buff. Now, Nightblades do not have a class skill that gives them this armor buff. They have to get it through this passive, so it's really important to run a Shadow ability. On the 1 bar setup, we're using Dark Shade to proc that armor buff. And then on the 2 bar, you're also using Dark Shade as well as Twisting Path. So you have a very good uptime on that buff. Just keep that in mind. About every 7 seconds, you want to be recasting a Shadow ability to keep that up as much as possible. Dark Vigor, this gives you a little bit of extra health on the front bar. And then Dark Veil, this increases the duration of things like Twisting Path and Dark Shade, so that's a nice passive as well. Siphoning, these are important as well, you guys. Catalyst gives you 20 ultimate when drinking a potion. So something to think about on this build, especially on the 1 bar setup, is don't drink a potion right before your ultimate. Wait to use your ultimate and then drink the potion after, especially when you're running Soul Harvest on the front bar. Since this only has a 70 cost, you can get that back up really quickly if you wait to use your potion until after you burn that ultimate. Magicka Flood does give you 8% max Magicka with a summoning ability on the front bar. That's why we always have either Swallow Soul or Sap Essence or both. You don't get 8% for each, you only get the 8% one time. But just keep that in mind. Soul Siphoner gives you extra healing done, and then Transfer gives you ultimate when you use a siphoning ability, so that's strong as well. In terms of weapon passives, you do want your Destruction Staff passives here. Light Armor, you'll want all of these as well because this is a 5-1-1 setup. If you are running Mages Guild abilities, you can get 2% max Magicka and Magicka Recovery for every one of those you have slotted. So if you're running Inner Light, if you're running Entropy, you can get a lot of extra max Magicka and recovery from that. Now, Sigil Order, if you're running the 2 bar setup with Channeled Acceleration, let me just slot that there so I can show you. The most important passive if you're doing that is called Concentrated Barrier. This gives you 5 to 6k damage shield depending on your champion points when you have a Psijic ability slotted on the front bar and you are blocking. So that's what that looks like, that little bubble around me you can see on my health bar. I now have an extra damage shield. So this combined with Ice Heart, combined with the damage shield enchant on our front bar, we're getting more than our max health in terms of damage shields on this build, which is really strong. Undaunted, of course, if you have this, make sure you unlock the Undaunted Metal passive. That gives you 6% extra Magicka stamina and health. Get your racial passives, and then Alchemy Medicinal Use for the extra potion duration. Let's talk about champion points really quickly. This will be good for both the 1-bar and the 2-bar setup. They're pretty similar in terms of the CP. So in the green tree, 34 Warlord, 14 into Sprinter, 64 Tenacity. That's going to help a lot with sustain with those heavy attacks. 56 Arcanist, 37 Mooncalf, 44 Shadow Ward, 20 into Tumbling. In the blue tree, 23 into Elfborn, 56 Elemental Expert, 49 into Spell Erosion, 35 Staff Expert, 56 Master at Arms, 51 into Thaumaturge for that dot damage. In the red tree, 66 Ironclad, 49 Hardy and Elemental Defender, 37 Thick-Skinned. I had 3 left over, so light armor focused there. And then 66 into Bastion. This does affect every damage shield you can get on this character. So your Ice Heart damage shield, your damage shield enchant on the Lightning Staff, as well as Psijic Order damage shield. If you're running that on the 2-bar setup, you'll get 22% extra bonus damage shield from this CP passive. It's one of the best you can use when you're soloing in ESO. Even if you're not max CP like I am, definitely put 20 to 30 points if you can here, because you get a really nice benefit from that. Now, last but not least, the outfit style in terms of just the armors that I'm using here. No head, obviously. The chest is going to be the light Mazatoon. The legs is going to actually be medium Malakath. Hands are going to be Mazatoon gloves. And then I believe the feet are just light Imperial. And then for the weapon style there, that is the Dro Mothra staff that comes from Ma of Lorcaj. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap it up for this solo 1-bar Magicka Nightblade build for ESO. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, of course, crush that like button. It really does help out the channel. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button as well. I put out weekly builds, guides, and discussions for the Elder Scrolls Online right here on YouTube. Make sure you check that out so you don't miss anything. If you'd like to support the channel, there's links for that below on the join button. Check out my social media where I post random thoughts and sometimes previews of what I'm working on. And until the next time, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you around in the next video.